Good to see you all. Good to see a band of Baldries up there, I see. Welcome to Victoria. We're on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. And I'm very excited to be here on the last day of the spring session of the Legislature. You all know it's been a very busy time. A whole bunch of legislation has been passed, a budget, a balanced budget, and a 3-year plan to continue balancing the budget. MSP premiums will be a thing of the past on January 1st. We've eliminated student interest on student loans for those at the back. There you go. We've introduced child opportunity benefits for those families that are standing here. We've continued to tackle the housing crisis. 20,000 homes are started or underway in 80 communities across British Columbia. We launched a public inquiry into money laundering, not a victimless crime, but one that's had a negative impact on the well-being of British Columbians and our economy. We've been improving public services that people count on. More doctors, more nurses, more hospitals and primary care centers. We're moving kids out of portables and into classrooms. We've hired 4,000 new teachers. We're restoring ferry services to coastal communities, and we're doing our level best to meet the needs of British Columbians in every corner of the province. We have the most ambitious climate action plan in the continent, and we passed legislation to make the path forward for a cleaner future by having a Zero Emission Vehicles Act that will see zero emission vehicles the only way to go by 2040. Clean BC is the most ambitious plan in the continent, and we're very proud of the work we've been able to do with our partners in the Legislature to make that happen. It's been a busy time, it's been a tumultuous time, but it's British Columbia. It's the Legislature, and we've always had interesting times. I know there are many scholars here from the press that have been here for, well, one could characterize it as generations, and so you know full well the challenges and the excitement of being here at the Legislative Assembly. It's been an exciting 22 months for me as Premier of British Columbia, and I'd be delighted to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, we're going to start off with Rob, then Jesse.
Do you want me to speak into the bush mic? Or is this...
Is there a bush mic?
Yeah.
Oh, there is.
The opposition Liberals have told me that they're going to volunteer to put up one of their MLAs to replace Speaker Plecas this afternoon. And they want to know if you're interested in that as a measure to restore some type of order to the Legislature at the expense of one of their MLAs. Do you have any interest in that?
Well, actually, we had a Liberal speaker when this Parliament began, and he chose to resign. Then another Liberal stood up and is now the Speaker. I think that there is a challenge in this building for sure, but I think the bulk of the challenges are in the Liberal caucus. They've had a difficult time finding relevance after a long period of time in government, and I appreciate that they have concerns about the Legislative Assembly, but those are better handled by the Legislative Assembly Management Committee. I talked to you 6 or 7 months ago and told you how my neighbors expressed curiosity that I didn't know what was going on at the Legislature. And I explained to them that I'm responsible for the government of British Columbia. I'm the president of the Executive Council, the head of cabinet. The Legislative Assembly, of which I am a member, has 86 other members, and we are governed by a committee of members from all parties. And they've been doing, I think, a spectacular job in an extremely difficult time. We passed budgets, we passed legislation, we have daily question period. The Legislature has been functioning. We have the wood splitter to go down now in infamy as part of BC lore. And that would not have happened had it not been for Speaker Plecas' curiosity. So has this been a difficult time for staff? Absolutely. I'm proud that they have been able to keep it together to get through this spring session. I know as we seek out a new clerk, which was a committee was struck today to do that the Legislature will continue to do the work of the people of British Columbia. But for me, I'm focused on the task of making sure that the services that people count on are there for them when they need them.
I would just be cheeky and say, so is that a no? I guess, first of all, is that you're not interested in their offer?
Well, we have a speaker. We have a speaker, and it's not the responsibility of the opposition to say we want a new one. And there are 3 parties in the Legislature, so and they are all represented on the Legislative Assembly Management Committee. That's the place to have that discussion.
Are you comfortable with the conduct of the Speaker, given what was in the McLaughlin report about how he handled his investigation and also the events of the last 24 hours?
Well, I'm not privy to the events of the last 24 hours because I've been preparing for budget estimates governments, which is part of my responsibility, defending the monies that Her Majesty provides to me to run my office and to conduct business of the government. And again, I have to say that the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, of which my member is the senior member in our group, Mike Farnworth, who knows the place backwards and forward, is a very capable individual, and I have every confidence that if there are issues that need to be addressed in the legislature, he will manage those on behalf of my caucus.
Okay, Vaughn?
You've not heard any concerns about Daryl Plecas' conduct
Well,
in the
I
last few days?
I don't make it my business.
Mike Farnworth and Gary Begg on the stuff that's been going on around here?
Well, I've been focusing on the tasks that
Yeah.
I have, Vaughn, and yes, I understand that there's a high anxiety, but I'm not surprised by that based on the past 12 months here in British Columbia. We have a minority parliament that has been functioning. We had a Liberal speaker who quit. We had a new Liberal speaker come forward, and I believe the business of British Columbia is being handled ably. The stuff that happens here is critically important to me and to all British Columbians, but at the end of the day, there are people responsible for that, and I have confidence that they'll manage those issues.
Daryl Plecas has your confidence to remain as Speaker of the Legislature.
Daryl Plecas is the Speaker of the Legislature, and he will be so until such time as he decides not to be. That's the way the place functions. And the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, of which he is a member, can come up with another way forward, but I'm not part of that. And I know this sounds odd to people back at home. Why is the Premier not intimately involved in the human resource management of the legislature, the determination about what happens when it happens? There are people that do that every day. And my job is to make sure that people get the services that they need, that we're building schools, we're building hospitals, we're making sure that we continue to have the strongest economy in Canada.
As an MLA, he has your confidence?
I'm a member of the legislature. There's a speaker. There has been a speaker since I arrived here, and there will be a speaker when I leave.
So Randy Ennis, very well respected, highly regarded Sergeant at Arms, retires today prematurely because of the conduct of the Speaker. You had the clerk, highly respected, well regarded, Kate Ryan Lloyd, leaving her office in the corridor in tears last night because of the Speaker. I know you're just one MLA, but would you not instruct your members on Lamsey to seek an alternative to this man being in that office?
No, I don't instruct the Legislative Assembly Management Committee. And I'm not aware. Randy Ennis is a friend of mine. And Randy hasn't told me why he's going on to other activities. So I'll wait for him to talk to me, Keith. And I don't mean any disrespect by that. But this place runs on rumors. And it has certainly before I arrived here, and it probably will run on rumors after I leave. So for me to be an arbiter on these issues is very difficult. Justice McLaughlin came in, recommendations were made. They were given to Lamsey, not to the government, but to Lamsey. So I'm obliged, as much as I like sticking my nose in everybody's business, I'm obliged to let this run its course, and that's what I intend to do.
And that wasn't a rumor, by the way. But anyways, are you, as an MLA, are you not concerned of what's going on here in terms of the atmosphere, the lack of trust, the non-partisanship of the partisanship of the Speaker?
Well, he's not a member of my party. You know, again, were it not for Daryl Plecas' curiosity, we would still have had abuses of power in the clerk's office. We don't have that anymore. I think these places will find their way, and it's up to the Legislative Assembly Management Committee to figure that out. And I appreciate it may appear that I'm being dodgy on this, but I have a whole bunch of other responsibilities, and I'm focusing on those. I'd love to dive into other people's business. I love to be at the draft when the Canucks make their first pick and give them some good advice, but that's not my thing. That's up to them to make those choices.
Tom, then McLean.
Premier, I'd like to switch to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, perhaps a bit better known outside of this area. As of today, we have an Alberta government truck that is touring around downtown Vancouver, urging support. We have competing First Nations groups looking to buy an equity stake, even up to a controlling stake in this pipeline. And we have a Prime Minister and Cabinet in Ottawa that have signaled very clearly that they're going to approve this thing on June 18th.
I haven't seen that signal.
Does any of this change your thinking?
What trucks drive around in the Lower Mainland? I remember a troll truck driving around not that long ago during an election campaign. It didn't have a lot of impact. or I wouldn't be standing here talking to you. So people have opinions, they'll express those opinions. The federal government hasn't made a determination yet on how they're going to proceed or if they're going to proceed with the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I'm told that it's a National Energy Board project, and I'll just leave it at that.
Good afternoon, Premier. I wonder if you've had a chance to examine the private members bill that Andrew Wilkinson put forward. I appreciate you'll probably say consider the source, but given the concerns we've seen in other jurisdictions with foreign intervention, is this not an idea, if not a specific bill, to consider?
Foreign intervention?
Into our elections and political activity in the province.
Well, I'm certainly, I've started watching CNN again now that Mr. Mueller has come forward. So all of these things are interesting, McLean. But again, I believe that we've done a whole bunch of things to try and clean up our elections process. We have a fixed election date in British Columbia. We have limits on campaign contributions. We made an effort to change the electoral system, and the public said we don't want to do that. I'm confident that the people of British Columbia are engaged in their political process, and I don't believe that there's foreign intervention that would merit me doing anything other than carrying on doing my best to meet the needs of British Columbians.
Hi, Premier. Over here.
Okay.
Do you think, looking back on the after the McLaughlin report was released and what was found about Mr. James's conduct, will the public be satisfied with him not having to repay any of the money? And I mean, the RCMP investigation is still ongoing. We don't know when that will wrap up. Mr. Lenz is sort of in this state of limbo.
Yep.
So, do you think the public is satisfied with how this has been handled so far?
Well, again, it has been a very challenging time here at the Legislature. I would not deny that for a second. I've been here as a member of the Legislature since 2005. I used to work here. I'm very passionate about the building and what goes on in it. And it has been traumatizing for many, many people. So that there are emotions that are running high within staff, concerns about what's going on, I would not for a minute deny that. But I also want to make sure that the people of BC understand that we continue to function as a parliamentary democracy. Questions are being asked about accountability. I'm right now, in my estimates, answering questions about how I'm spending the public money, and that's as it should be. The opposition is doing its job. The government is doing its job. We're a minority parliament that's coming up to 2 years in government, and I believe that the public should have confidence, and based on opinions that are polled, people are comfortable with the way the government is being conducted, and I believe that's a good thing.
Premier, at the start of the news conference today, you listed a list of what you feel your government's accomplishments have been in the past couple months. What would you say or feel are your low point or low points of this session?
You're great, Dirk. No top five, though? No top five?
I think I got two.
Okay, you got two shots. Well, I would say that that there's been a whole bunch of high points for sure. It's a challenging job, and it's an honor and a privilege to be the Premier of British Columbia. Only 35 other people have done it, and so I've said before that when you're in opposition, and this is I say this with all respect to the current occupants of the opposition offices, it's really difficult to be miserable every day. And I spent 12 years doing that, and I do not want to do it again. My wife will tell you that I jump out of bed even with what I believe is the worst man cold ever visited upon anyone. I still jump out of bed every day because I'm excited to make a difference in people's lives. So I don't know if there has been a low spot, Dirk, and I don't mean to be avoiding the question. There have been challenges, of course, but on balance, I'm really happy to be doing this work, and I'm privileged and honored to have the opportunity.
Can I bring up gas prices
Sure.
and the
That would be
the
one.
loss in court on on the pipeline?
The loss in court on the pipeline. We said from the beginning on our ability to regulate the movement of goods through our jurisdiction that it should be conducted, that this decision should be conducted by the Supreme Court of Canada. I said at the time to Premier Notley and to Prime Minister Trudeau that I would absolutely encourage them, the Prime Minister particularly, because he has the ability to do that, to make a direct reference to the Supreme Court so we can get an answer to this question. The Confederation that we live in today is not the Confederation of 20 years ago or 120 years ago. I've talked to people people about the prospect of an Alberta premier siding with a federal government. That's something that Peter Lougheed never would have done. Bill Bennett never would have done from a BC perspective. Rennie Levesque. So our federation has been a history of tugging and pulling of the center and the decentralized approach. I was going to say MacDonaldian, but his tattoo's been taken down, and that'll now go on the whiteboard of words I can't say. But our federation has been centralized and then decentralized and then centralized again. So I believe the Supreme Court is the best place to test jurisdiction. We've been siding with the federal government on carbon taxes, for example. Other provinces have been siding with the federal government against our desire to manage issues here. On gas prices, I think all British Columbians are perplexed, and particularly in the Lower Mainland, how a 1 cent a litre increase in a carbon tax will lead to a 40-cent increase in a litre of gasoline. We've been trying to find answers from the providers of the products, the refined products, into the Lower Mainland. We haven't been getting complete answers, and that's why we've asked the Utilities Commission, that has subpoena powers and ability to compel testimony, to look into this so that the public understands how and why we've seen this drastic spike in prices in the Lower Mainland. The refining margins between Alberta and Edmonton and Vancouver have gone from about 2.5 or 4 cents to 24 cents. And those issues need to be addressed, and we can do that through the Commission. We're also working on some ideas about how we can get more refined product into the existing pipeline. The Trans Mountain Pipeline has seen a decline in refined product and an increase in diluted bitumen. I talked to the Prime Minister about that. He acknowledged that this was a national issue. I'm going to be seeing the Prime Minister next week on a couple of occasions. I'm going to continue to press him for federal intervention to help out the drivers here in British Columbia.
Okay, we have Shannon, Tanya, and then we're going to end with Richard.
Hello, Premier. Blueberry River First Nation is going back to court after a year of agreeing to stay their court action against the government.
Yep.
They say those negotiations have failed. They say that the government has done sort of a pivot towards oil and gas and development, and that's not something they can tolerate or agree with, and it's not something they can negotiate with. Given your government has signaled it will look to incorporate UNDRIP into provincial law in the fall, is there a way to do that, given that some First Nations groups have your government in court and are not on board with oil and gas development?
Blueberry had the government's, British Columbia, in court, not my government. And we've been endeavoring to negotiate, as we do in a number of issues, a number of cases with the private sector that are have issues with provincial policies and with Indigenous groups all the time. And it's regrettable that a negotiated agreement wasn't realized, but the Blueberry Nation is exercising their legal rights, and they have every opportunity to do that. It's unfortunate that a settlement wasn't able to be negotiated outside of the courtroom. I would have preferred that. I'm sure Blueberry would have preferred that. But their court rights are there for them to take up, and that's what they're doing.
What does that maybe signal about the difficulties of bringing UNDRIP into provincial legislation in the fall? It sounds like it's going to be a very complicated endeavor.
It is. It has been, and I wouldn't deny that. There's been much commentary about the challenges of implementing UNDRIP, but we have seen positive steps forward. The environmental assessment process was done in coordination and consultation with the First Nations Leadership Council. We've been working with children and families to implement the Ed John report, which is a co-management model. And so co-management is the number one challenge, and it will differ from nation to nation. I think it's important for people to understand and acknowledge, particularly the young people that are here today, that Indigenous people are not homogenous, nor are journalists. Journalists have different points of view. Legislators have different points of view, and we come at things differently. And so the notion that there is one solution to the challenges of reconciliation in British Columbia is clearly not the case. Going back to Tom's question about Indigenous groups that want to see the Trans Mountain twinning, and a similar number of Indigenous groups that don't want to see it go forward at different places along the corridor and along the route. These are challenging issues, but issues that we're stepping up to try and address to the best of our abilities. But we're not going to meet with success every day, but our objective is to ensure that we do what we can to have genuine reconciliation and to continue to have the strongest economy in the country, the lowest unemployment and the fastest growth, and balanced budgets and a AAA credit rating, and eliminating the operating debt.
Okay, Tanya?
4,000 new teachers, classrooms instead of portables. All of those issues are really important to people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous.
Tanya?
Just making sure you're done there. Okay. So just a question from
I couldn't talk for a day. I'm trying to make up for it.
A question from my colleagues in Vancouver. They were looking for a comment from you on the port lockout. It appears that there has been an agreement, a tentative agreement reached, but still, could you talk about the impact on BC?
Well, I'm grateful that a resolution appears to have been found. Minister Baines just gave me a quick 2-second update on that. That's very good for the BC economy. We're a trading province. The Port of Vancouver is among the busiest on the west coast of North America. We need to make sure that we move goods and services in and out. So the lack of a significant economic impact at a critical part of the cycle in the economy is really important. I'm grateful that there's resolution.
Okay, last question, Richard.
I have a few questions. First, you're almost at 2 years here in terms of being the premier. That's often a time where we see governments make personnel changes around cabinet. Are you considering heading into the summer thinking about retooling or reshaping your cabinet? And on that, we've heard a lot about Ginny Sims over the last little bit. Do you still have confidence in her going forward?
I do have confidence in Ginny and all members of our cabinet and our caucus. I've been involved with NDP caucuses going back to the 1980s, and I'm not saying this just because there's recordings, but I've not seen a group that has been as tight and focused as the group that I have the honor to lead right now. 20 of my colleagues are men, 20 of my colleagues are women. They're diverse in terms of age, experience, ethnic background, Indigenous, Métis, and that diversity, I think, is the strength of British Columbia, and it's the strength of our caucus. I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish, and I have no plans to make any changes at this time.
One more question, Richard.
I know. Last question. Another personnel question. Sources tell me that you're losing your press secretary tomorrow. Can you tell me a little bit about her and why you're making that change in your office?
Well, it was difficult for me to come to this. As you know, I had the honor of officiating at Sheena and Liam's wedding, even though I have no authority to do that. I was grateful when Sheena announced her pregnancy and that she wanted me to be the doula. I'm responsible for boiling water and getting blankets, or no, towels, that's what it is, if I remember, sheets, boiling the water. People may have noticed that Sheena is pregnant, and she'll be leaving tomorrow to start a great chapter, personal chapter in her life. I'm going to miss her desperately. We've been hanging out for 5 years. I met her first when she had a runny nose and she was about this big, and so now she's going to be chasing around someone with a runny nose that'll be even smaller than that. So I'm very happy for Sheena. I know all of you are. It's been a delight to work with her, and I know that most of you, I won't name any names, most of you think she's okay, and we're going to miss her a lot, but we've got cake. So if Evan wants to bring the cake out, we'll say farewell to Sheena. And thank you for that probing question. Oh, and Katie. Katie's a couple weeks ahead too, aren't you?
Ready to pop.
Yeah. So here's to procreation. Everybody have some cake. Thanks, everybody.